Hello, and thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Carol Jenkins. The program is Black America. And my guest today is Karen D. Taylor, founder and executive director of While We Are Still Here. It's an organization whose mission is to preserve the legacy of the people and the history of Harlem. She's also the recipient of the Monumental Women's Moving History Forward Award. And Karen, thanks so much for being here today.
I'm very happy to be here, Carol.
And thank you for this work. It's really incredible.
Thank you so much.
You know, as a Harlem resident, I can really appreciate what you've done. I had no idea that you had actually formalized this preservation of the history.
We had to do it because time was moving very quickly. The population was changing very quickly. So we said we have got to salvage whatever history we can, bring it together, codify it, and While We Are Still Here is the result of that.
Well, and While We're Still Here refers to two famed buildings.
Yes.
That are the anchor of this project, where many, many famous Black Americans lived. So
yes,
it's 555 Edgecombe.
And 409 Edgecombe Avenue, and they were sister buildings, and I actually live at 555 Edgecombe Avenue. And I've lived there for probably, I guess, 30-something years.
You're a newcomer.
I'm a quote-unquote newcomer.
Right.
And when I first got there were many elders in that building. And they had, a lot of them were these older women with this elegant bearing. And I found out later that a lot of them were Cotton Club Coreens.
Ah. As was my stepmother, yes.
Really?
Yes, my sister's mom
Amazing.
was one of the Cotton Club
dancers.
Coreens, right?
Yeah.
I love that description of it. I once did a story and saw her behind one of those big fans and nothing else, and I said,
uh-oh.
But that's the history that we're talking about, Cotton Club dancers, the writers, the performers, the musicians, all of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, Harlem it's so historically rich, and it's wonderful, that the Met had that whole Harlem Renaissance exhibit, and there's so much more to Harlem than the Harlem Renaissance. And hopefully, while we are still here, we'll be able to kind of broaden people's consciousness around all the wonderful cultural things that happened in Harlem.
I know.
Yeah.
And of course, I describe myself as living in Harlem. I've always wanted to, and finally got my wish. My wish came true, and my daughter, who very nicely was trying to explain to me, "No, Mother, you live in Hamilton Heights," and so
Right.
We were talking about the divisions. People refer to Sugar Hill, West Harlem. Talk to us. How do you define Harlem and its many elements?
Well, geographically, Harlem begins at 110th Street and goes all the way up to, in many people's minds, 155th Street. But let me backpedal and say there's this old Duke Ellington song
Yes.
where he opens with this rap. And he's talking to this woman, he says, baby this and baby that, and I want you to come to Harlem. And Harlem is that neighborhood with all the beautiful bronze people that ends at 145th Street. So at that point, when Duke Ellington recorded that song, it was 145th Street.
Right.
And so somehow or another, after a while, it went up to 155th Street. But one of our former board members, June Benjamin, said we should just have Harlem end at 162nd Street because that's where Max Bond, the architect, lived, and J. Rosamond Johnson. So we're saying 162nd Street.
So from 110th to 167th, River to...
162nd.
Right, River to...
River to river, I would
Right.
say. It's...
That's a big chunk of property.
It's a big chunk of property.
And a lot of history. And what I love is that in the description of the project, where you say, yes, home to all of these famous people, including the numbers runners, who are essential to Harlem life at a certain point as well.
Absolutely. 409, I like to describe 409 as like the more intellectual building because you had all the judges there and the lawyers and the doctors. 555 had a lot of jazz musicians, so that's kind of like the more party building.
Right, the
But,
party building.
You know, but Paul Robeson actually lived there. Count Basie lived there. Later, Cassandra Wilson lived there. I mean, it's just this whole list of all of these extraordinary people who lived in Harlem in 409 and 555 because they had no other choice, especially back in the day. Before what I refer to as the Lorraine Hansberry era, they had no other choice.
Huh. And the Lorraine Hansberry era, what year do you place on?
I'd
What
say
years?
like in the 50s.
In the 50s.
And that's when, you know, people could just kind of move to St. Albans or...
Where we moved, right?
Yeah.
Right. And I remember my family talking about when we first came up from Alabama. You know, I was about 3 or 4 at the time, but we lived on Sugar Hill. I don't know where. I think we'll try to find out where that was. So what is Sugar Hill? I mean, it's got such a famous, wonderful sounding, you know, this is the place where so much happened in Black America.
Yeah, I guess you would call it the place where middle-class Black people lived. And they had this sweet life up on the hill with the beautiful brownstones and the beautiful limestones and the gorgeous architecture, especially along Convent Avenue.
Right.
That is gorgeous. That is gorgeous. And Sugar Hill is just one part of Harlem. I mean, Harlem's like this kind of umbrella, but we've got Sugar Hill, Hamilton Heights, and
where the Ralph Ellison building is, you know, and
Yeah.
one of the residents there is in her 90s. And at our Christmas party, to your point of one of the reasons that you're doing this, is that we had residents who've been there for 50, 60 years, and then we had our newcomers, the ones who just moved in last year.
Yeah.
And so this entire area, you know, is a part of gentrification.
Yes.
And what you're trying to do is to hold on to that history so people realize what actually happened there.
We have to hold on to the history. This weekend, I actually interviewed a set of twins. They are, I guess, late 80s, going into their 90s, completely lucid, and they were born and raised in Harlem.
Ah,
Their father was a doctor.
uh-huh.
They lived on 147th between, I believe, Convent and Amsterdam.
Right, right,
And they said, well, I asked them about gentrification.
right.
And one of the twins said, she said, when we lived on 147th Street, we gentrified the block.
Ah,
There were 8 Black physicians on that street who bought homes, and they explained that, you know, the white folks who lived there, one was an Irish drunk. I'm not being stereotypic, I'm just repeating
Yeah.
what she told me.
right.
One was a wife beater, you know, like the white families on the block. They were very poor, and they would come knocking on the twins' door for food, and their mother would give the kids food because they were starving from next door. So it's very interesting the way we perceive what we perceive.
Right, right. Well, I mean, and of course, the area was originally built for wealthy whites, you know, successful people who use that area as a resort, vacation area.
Yes.
You know, and what I've often said to friends of mine who, you know, who have been there, I said, yes, the wealthy built this and they want it back. So
They want it back, and it appears that they're going to get it back, you know, which really puts, I think, a lot of pressure on, you know, preservation organizations to try to codify as much of the history as we possibly can before we, you know, pass away and go on to the other side.
And
We've got to do that.
we have to. And speaking of preservation, we understand that a dear friend to this program, Brent Leggs, was very helpful in funding for the project, the medals that you've placed around the area. So talk to us about Brent Leggs.
Brent Leggs is my hero.
And ours, yes.
Yes.
We love him.
Everyone loves Brent. Brent is one of the most humble, quiet forces of nature that I have ever met. I mean, essentially, he single-handedly went across the country and raised, around $80 million.
If not more by now,
By
right?
now for
Yeah.
like black preservation organizations.
And worked for the creation of the Civil Rights Monument in Birmingham, which is my family territory. So we know him from the really hard work that he did there, the Madam C.J. Walker home. But in Harlem, you know, you approached his funding operation, and as you were telling
Yes.
me, it took 3 times.
Right. We applied 3 times. We were rejected 3 times. And then we were invited to a board development retreat in Massachusetts. So we went, and there were 4 other small black organizations, and we met Brent. And we went through the little workshopy things, you know, with the board and the board development. And as we were, you know, leaving and closing the session down, he says, well, Karen, what would you like to see in Harlem? I said, historic markers. He said, well, how many? I said, 25. And within approximately 2 weeks, I got an email from a foundation that initially was going to fund the project, but some things happened and it didn't turn out the way we thought it would turn out. And so Brent essentially helped to fund the Markers Project.
That is great.
And
That
New
is-
York Life is also one of the funders.
Right, right. And you were saying earlier that you don't know why you decided 25. You could have as easily said 50 or 100, right?
That's right, that's right.
You know, but did the 25. And so let's talk about some of the 25.
Sure.
I was surprised to see that Marcus Garvey, I don't know why that surprised me, but to see, you know, him so prominently placed in this. Tell us about his.
It was called the Marcus Garvey Meeting Hall. And for many years, many Garveyite events happened at this particular place after Garvey had passed away. The funny thing about these markers is that we actually wanted to put one on 135th Street, which was the site of his original office, but because of the way the street's configured, the Department of Transportation said, no, it can't go there. So we said, okay. He also lived on Strivers Row. Strivers Row is a landmark block. We would not really want to put that. I'm sure they wouldn't have let us do that anyway.
Right. This is a
And-
physical marker that says Marcus Garvey was here, and this is
Yes.
what he did, and you've done that for 25 places
Yes.
throughout the community.
Yes. Yep, for 25 places. And 21 are up, and the other 4 will go up. But there's construction at those sites, so we can't put the markers up until the construction is done.
Right. And talk to us about Pauli Murray. Going through my
Paul-
list of favorites, of course. These are
Yes, Pauli Murray, I'm glad she's finally getting her flowers at this
Right.
point. She was a very influential legal theorist, and she influenced Thurgood Marshall and Charles Hamilton Houston in her legal theories about segregation and what was constitutional and what was not constitutional. And she also was very influential on Ruth Bader Ginsburg
Yes.
in terms of her perspectives on gender equality. And Pauli was quite a Renaissance woman. She was an Episcopal priest. She was a poet. She was an attorney, of course. And she just lived her
She did
life the way she
everything.
wanted to live her life.
completely unique person. I mean, she is. I mean, one of my sheroes.
Yes, absolutely.
And so, who else do we have?
Who else do we have? We've got Jungle Alley. And
Jungle Alley.
Jungle
Now, I'm not
Alley.
familiar. My history is missing. What's Jungle Alley?
Jungle Alley is 134th Street, and my grandfather, when
Yeah.
he first came from Barbados, he lived on Jungle Alley. I didn't realize that until after I went to Ellis
Right.
Island. And so basically, I said, oh my gosh, Grandpa's address was 130-something Street. And so Jungle Alley was a street of like speakeasies
Ah,
where, you know, you'd have people like Duke Ellington and Gladys Bentley and the Nicholas brothers perform. And a lot of those spaces were racially segregated. So the performers could come perform, but they couldn't, you know, black people from Harlem couldn't just go there.
So Jungle Alley was where blacks performed, but were not allowed to participate in the speakeasies, or
Yes,
that's
and
where
some of the
alcohol was.
illegal, right?
Right. Well, permitted there, but but
Yeah,
nowhere else.
nowhere else. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Oh, so now
And so
let's go
we've
ahead.
got
Let's look at some of the others. I'm so excited by every single person.
by every step, because they're all these extraordinary people. They're just, I mean, Marcus Garvey. You look at this Jamaican man. He gets this idea in his mind that he's going to travel all over the world and assess how black people are treated. So he comes up with this idea for the United Negro Improvement Association. He comes to Harlem with it, and he's such a great organizer that there's millions of Garveyites around the world. There was no internet, there was no telephone, there was no television. So it's really a powerful history that this man in the 1920s did what he did.
Right.
It's amazing.
Right. And Nelson Mandela years later, of course. Tell us
Absolutely.
about Nelson Mandela and Harlem.
Absolutely. Nelson came, when he came from Robben Island, the people of Harlem, and David Dinkins was the mayor then.
Right.
Mandela came, and it was gorgeous. It was just packed full of people, 125th Street and 7th Avenue, as far as the eye could see, all the way west. All of these people came out for Nelson Mandela. And it was just fantastic. And Harlem has this history of being connected to the international African diaspora. So that's why it was really important for us to include Nelson Mandela and Marcus Garvey in that whole international thing.
Right. And you also have the Clarks who lived in
Yes.
one of your buildings, and many people may not remember how important they were to the understanding of Black American families and development. Tell us about.
Well, they lived at 555 Edgecombe Avenue, and I was going through some old like real estate papers or whatever with the building, and I found out that they actually lived in apartment 6B. And Kenneth and Mamie Clark were research psychologists, and they developed the famed doll test.
Exactly.
Where they would ask these children, which doll is pretty and which doll is nice, and they'd give them a white doll and a black doll. And much to everyone's dismay, the black children preferred the white doll. And they were also instrumental in Brown v. Board of Education because they gave expert testimony to support Thurgood Marshall and his team.
Right. And Thurgood himself
Lived at 409.
Calling him by his first name,
Yeah, like right. Oh, Thurgood.
Thurgood,
Yeah.
right. Justice Marshall himself lived in the
409. He lived in
409,
409.
right.
Yes. And we did a documentary a few years ago based on oral histories. And there is a woman, Miss Laverne Gaither, who still lives in 409 Edgecombe. She lived there from the time she was 7 years old. She's probably 95 years old now. And she tells this great story of when she would be going to her cello lessons. She'd be walking up the hill on 155th Street. She'd see well, before he was Justice Marshall, she'd see Thurgood Marshall coming from work off the train.
Right.
And he'd say, "You're a mighty little girl. Let me help you carry that cello." So he would carry her cello all the way up to Amsterdam Avenue. At the time, there was a trolley car.
Right.
And she said, "But I don't need help. It's not heavy." But he still insisted on carrying it. She said he was a very nice man. And he also used to go to her recitals. I mean, there was this sense of community in Harlem that I got a taste of late, because I've only lived there for 30-something years.
Right.
But every single elder that I speak to talks about the sense of safety they felt, the sense of community they felt when they lived in Harlem. I mean, it's just this extraordinary place.
Well, and you've done, in addition to collecting these oral histories, which is just so important, you've also done presentations. So talk to us about that. I know at the Apollo here at the Graduate Center, where you bring the experts and to talk about this very firm and deep history of productivity in Harlem.
Yes, I like the way you put that. The productivity. It was such a productive place. So we have programming in the arts and humanities, and we're actually in 2025, well, we're in 2025 now, we're going to begin a whole series of programming that's supported by the National Endowment for the Humanities, and it's called Harlem as an Incubator. So
Harlem as an incubator.
As an incubator, yes. And we're going to have various panels and other kinds of events that talk about different aspects of Harlem's history. For example, Harlem and the sciences. At Harlem Hospital, you had some of the greatest medical minds
This is true.
and so we're going to talk about that. And some of the panels will have physicians talking about that and historians talking about that. And we'll also talk about, Harlem and Black dance, and Harlem and arts education for the youth, Harlem School of the Arts, Dance Theater of Harlem. These were small organizations that began in 1968, and now they're institutions in and of themselves. And
So this is fantastic. So
Yeah.
the humanities, I mean, that's
Yes.
big time funding. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. Now, we tried for that maybe 4 times.
Really?
But in the tradition of Black perseverance,
Right.
we must persevere. So we keep asking and asking until they say yes or go away and never come back again.
So now there are forces, and I know that you suggest reading lists, of all of the Harlem former residents who wrote, produced art, all kinds of things, and in this current climate that we're in, has you as the head of a very vigorous and important nonprofit, have you felt yet the backlash to doing all of this documentation that you're doing?
We haven't had any backlash yet. Probably if we were in Florida trying to do this, we
right.
might have some backlash.
Right.
But no backlash. We've gotten pretty good support in terms of partnerships, like with Teachers College and the Schomburg, and we've gotten decent financial support.
So this is great. Your history so you're a historian now, no matter what you started out.
No matter what. I started out as an editor, now I'm a historian, but it's all connected because it's all reading all the time.
Right. And we talked about our both being at the Feminist Press, which is
Yes.
based here at CUNY you at some point, and I served on the board in a couple of go-rounds, for for that. So I think that in terms of making sure that the history exists and is available, that, is, I think, pretty much, the objective, to use the word, the assignment,
It's the
that most
assignment.
of us have.
We've got to do it no matter where we are, because, all of the areas, the communities, the neighborhoods that were previously Black are now being, it's just changed. The population has changed. And even in a place like Atlanta, over near the Ebenezer Baptist Church, I understand now that that's predominantly white people who live there. And that was like where Dr. King had his church and his family. And, even in parts of San Francisco, in parts of North Carolina, all over. So we have really got to put our nose to the grindstone and make sure that we can codify as much of the history as we can,
Yeah.
because we're not going to be here forever.
Right. And so the work you're doing is tremendous. And I think, what is the term you used? You want to make sure that Harlem history is undeniable,
Is unavoidable.
Unavoidable.
So when you walk down the street and you see, these big purple and gold markers, you'll get a sense of what came before and why it's important.
Well, thank you so much for everything that you've done. 25 markers are almost up, and you have a list for the next 25, I'm sure.
We do. I think we have around like 112 people on the list. Or
112
people, organizations, everything.
Well,
We'll see how far they let us go.
I cannot wait. Thank you and your group. I mean, I just thought originally you're a group of loosely formatted residents. I thought, no, you've created a nonprofit and you are seriously documenting the history.
Absolutely.
You've been quoted as saying that you want to make sure that Harlem's history is unavoidable.
And that is the main point of the markers throughout the community, so that when people pass by and see these purple and gold signs, they'll say, wow, that happened here? And hopefully it'll prompt people to do more research. Originally, we wanted to have QR codes on the signs, but the city wouldn't allow us to do that.
Not yet, at any rate, with the way technology is going.
That's what they said. What they said was the QR codes will become obsolete. And that's really true, but in the meantime, QR codes are all over the place. But that's neither here nor there.
Neither here nor there. It will be undeniable and unavoidable, the history of everything. Thank you so much, Karen, for everything that you're doing.
Thank you for having me, Carol.
Thanks to Karen Taylor, who is the executive director and founder of While We Are Still Here. Make sure you visit their website, whilewearestillhere.org, to locate the markers and to see them for yourselves, to donate and to learn of the other ways they are keeping the legacy of Harlem alive. I'm Carol Jenkins. The program is Black America. We'll see you the next time. And now you can download the CUNY TV app in your Apple Store or in Google Play and find us there.